Well, to trust it, I think same hall 2 months back we had discussed, and when Professor Kondapalli said, we must trust but verify. That is applicable to China as well as to Pakistan, many other countries. We move on to Jorawar now. Jorawar, you have been chasing the dragon for quite some time, and I don't know how far you have come in your research. But tell me, taking into account all factors, would you say that India, China are nearer today than they were before Prime Minister Modi came to power?
So, when the new government came, I see a dramatic change that happens after the Xi Jinping visit. So, the initial impulse and instinct of the Prime Minister was to focus on the economic factor and try and weave that into the China relationship. But I see a rethinking happening a few months after that. And you actually now see, I would argue that we are actually further apart in that sense, in terms of perceptions of both sides. And that's the impression I even get when I visit China, that that there is a complete mismatch of expectations from the other side. But I also see the Chinese side moving ahead with their larger regional policy, and I think you're seeing the Indian side in not a terribly good position in terms of just the changes that are happening around it. We are still in a very reactive mode. So I would say that we began by saying we're going to focus on these common interests, but we've sort of let that drift away. Maybe there's several reasons for that, but I certainly see a sort of an inflection point within India where we've kind of let the mistrust become a more dominant part of this meta image. One argument could be that, as Ambassador Mansingh, you are beginning to confront the areas of differences far more seriously, which naturally brings you into some sort of friction with the Chinese, while the early approach was to leave aside problems and focus on the common areas. I'm not saying they're not doing the common areas, you're doing it on BRICS, SCO, but I think it's a more complex policy. But we've got to be careful. Maybe I'm being prescriptive here. You've got to be a little careful, because if you let the differences become dominant, then you aren't at a stage right now to control the relationship and the other variables that come into play. And you might be on the losing side. So I think we need to sort of reassess this complex engagement, competition, convergence, divergence, and put it in a far more holistic framework. The discourse needs to be a little more sensible and moderate, rather than getting too far into these binaries of, we have a tendency to create these straw man images of a friendship and an enemy, which both aren't true. And then you try and disprove both cases. I think let's take a slightly more nuanced, complex position. Hold on to your core interests, but there are lots of other areas where you have to work with the Chinese. The system certainly is working with the Chinese, and you have no option but to do that.
Okay. After this visit, I think Elizabeth Roche wrote in Live Mint, Modi visit yielded no breakthrough on the border nor on how to bridge the trade gap. In these two specific points, would you like to comment? Jorawar.
Yeah. So the border issue is something which obviously you can't just talk your way through it. You have certain positions that have been in play, and there has been sort of a very glacial progress that has been made over several governments have contributed to it. We are today, I think, in a position where domestically, there are two aspects of the story. Domestically, are we in a position to accept the status quo today as the final frontier with China? I don't know a clear-cut answer to that, because privately in the think tanks we're told, yes, we're willing to cut a deal on the LOAC. That is, you swap claims, India gets Arunachal Pradesh formally, and you accept Aksai Chin with China. Are the Indian people willing to do that? Is the political leadership willing to expend capital for that? The second aspect is on the Chinese side. Are they willing to cut a deal on this, or is the eastern sector become so powerful in their domestic system and are they willing to sort of give up the leverage that an unresolved border provides them? So we still don't know the answer to that. That's something where insiders who are interacting with the Chinese closely, the special representatives, can tell us to what stage are we in terms. But I see both factors important. You can't say Indian domestic politics does not matter. Indian domestic politics matters, and I don't see the Indian political elite right now willing to expend capital on a status quo as is where is solution with the Chinese. But having said that, even if they can you get the Chinese to reciprocate? So we are in a kind of a situation where why should an Indian Prime Minister stick his neck out with China when he's unclear of the intentions of the other side on this issue? So again, so this is a classic case where you simply aren't able to assess the other side's level of interest in a final settlement. So again, getting into a prescriptive way, maybe the earlier framework where you operated on multiple dimensions, you focus on the border, you focus on your common interests, and you focus on your differences, you have to keep proceeding along those lines. If we allow the border to again become a stumbling block or a sort of a conditional to other facets of the India-China relationship, again, I see India on the losing side of that equation, simply because there are lots of other actors out there in the Asia-Pacific who are going to take up that space that you are denying yourself. So I think we need a clear set of debates on what are India's interests in that broader equation. And again, I would disagree if somebody says make the border dispute resolution as a condition to anything you do with the Chinese. Yes, it will be a sort of a fluid process where you will have competition, cooperation, and you're going to have to move forward. So, thank you.